Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon from here in Dubai to wherever you are in the world, and welcome to this, the latest in the CIPS MENA webinar series. My name is Sam Champong, and today we have a technology theme, and we'll be focusing on mitigating supply chain risk. We're very, very lucky to be supported today by Ivalua, who will be taking you through the subject from a global and a regional perspective. During the session, if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A section below. There is a Q&A button. You can type in your questions, and we'll be addressing all of your questions at the end. If you want to ask a question live during the Q&A session, use the raise hand button and I'll unmute your microphone. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the speakers. So we have Sarah Omar, the MEA Sales Director from Ivalua, and Sundar Kamak, who is the Head of Manufacturing Solutions for Ivalua. Sarah, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Sam, and hello, everyone. Good afternoon, as per my time. My name is Sarah Omar. I am based out of Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, Sales Director for Middle East and Africa region at Ivalua. Good morning and good evening to all of you who joined us also today from different regions to attend this webinar. Thank you, CIPS, for also hosting and having us today on your platform with your members and membership around the region to share some of our knowledge and some of our expertise in the field of technology related mainly to mitigating supply chain risk and how to build resilient enterprises. I am very honored that today I am joined with my colleague from Ivalua, Sundar Kamak. Sundar is dialing in from Michigan in the US. So it's a bit early for him. I think it's 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. Sundar will correct me if I'm wrong. And Sundar heads our manufacturing solutions vertical in Ivalua. And without further ado, I'll also introduce Sundar to start, and he will be leading the session today. One point that I'd like to highlight that we will also have a live product demonstration on our SRM at the end of the session, and we hope that you will find the whole session useful and interactive. When we will dedicate the rest, the second half of the hour to receive all your questions and answer them as Sam has explained. Thank you very much. Sundar, over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Sundar Kamak. I am very excited to participate in this session with Sarah, my colleague from Ivalua. As Sarah mentioned, I am responsible for the manufacturing solutions at Ivalua. It's also a great pleasure to be part of this, and I really want to thank CIPS for organizing this event. So Sarah gave us a very good introduction. So with no further ado, what I will do is I will start sharing the presentation and we'll walk through the agenda, how to build resilient supply chain. That's the core topic of this today's session. Sarah and I both will continue to walk through the presentation as well as go through a conversational approach, but our goal is to make sure that we actually have an opportunity for us to walk through the demo as well as answer further questions at the end. The agenda is very simple. We're gonna go look at some macro factors in terms of what are the current challenges in the supply chain, how do you actually build resilient supply chain, using the concepts around supplier management and supplier risk management. Then we follow up with the demo and a live Q&A. So to get started, right, we are globally seeing unprecedented challenges in 2020. Especially for manufacturing companies, we are faced with overwhelming situations. And whether you are an automotive manufacturer or you're a life sciences or you are actually doing in high tech, a lot of these challenges are basically driven by some of the market-facing events we have here. But across all these three different, or the manufacturing different verticals, in a nutshell, we have many issues which basically are driving companies in terms of closing plants, product line stoppages, as well as stock limitations because of short inventory. And this is all caused by some of the supply shortages triggered by some of the pandemic situations we are facing. And no matter whichever industry you are, whether you're in life sciences, automotive, high tech, oil and gas, CPG, organizations continue to face these challenges in their supply chain. The whole goal of the session is to really understand how supply disruption causing delay of current products can be overcome through a strategic approach around supplier management and risk management, and continue to build resilient supply chain, which is also a competitive one as you continue to drive your business forward. The first thing I wanted to actually talk about is, in terms of change and uncertainty, that is actually the new norm. We have seen that. But more importantly, what is the role of procurement and supply chain? Some of the key forces driving change across supply and procurement change can also be opportunities. We also will look at what are the procurement's response to be prepared to adopt, pivot, and thrive when faced with market driving challenges, when faced with forces driving changes as well as challenges. So some of the market forces, economic uncertainty. Economic uncertainty can cause both by internal events as well as external events. Changing regulations and customer requirements, and that is something we continue to face, no matter whether we are in a pandemic, whether we have other external factors like the tsunami hitting us, or even political unrest. Third one is accelerating digitization and technology innovation. That is actually more of an opportunity, rather than a threat, because procurement and supply chain continue to benefit from digitization and technology innovation as they get ready to accept these forces driving the change. The second area where procurement and supply chain can impact is some of these challenges can be converted into opportunities. So with respect to economic uncertainty, the role of procurement and supply chain now is to rapidly understand market needs, build strong network to understand innovation. So you actually have a very strong supplier and partner network which can drive innovation and which results in better utilization of your supplier capabilities. So in the end, you become the customer of choice for your suppliers. And procurement response also, to become the customer of choice for your suppliers, you have to build, as a procurement organization, procurement leadership organization, you have to build enhanced supplier strategic relationship with your suppliers. You got to connect your supply chain so that you can continue to drive visibility into the many tiers of your supply chain. And also, you have to build strong relationships so you can continue to drive co-innovation and development with your suppliers, because guess what? Your suppliers, your overall suppliers budget in terms of R&D is actually going to be a lot more than your individual R&D budget. So you want to have the collective knowledge and the force from your supplier and partner network to continue to help you drive innovation and development. But the existing challenges which we see in the market amplify the impact, because there is also underlying core challenges within the context of your organization. That can be siloed data, poor collaboration with your supply records, as well as lack of visibility into your supply disruption, in terms of which can cause performance issues, compliance issues, quality issues, and ultimately can lead to increased safety stock to prevent stockouts and missed, or it can even create delayed payments, which obviously will have a huge impact on your revenue and the margins as you continue to build your business. So, Sarah, you've been serving customers in the Middle East region, especially where you are. What are you seeing with respect to, what are you hearing from your customers and the organization you speak to?
Thank you very much, Sundar, for shedding the light on these challenges and looking it from a global perspective as well. I believe when we have conversations in the recent 3-4 months since the start of the pandemic, and also even before the start of the pandemic, I could see one of the main pain areas that we as procurement professionals in our organizations are facing is the aspect of the siloed data and poor collaboration with stakeholders internally. That's one of the main pain areas that I can always hear repetitively from my colleagues. And I believe that's because we are still at a point where we are at adoptive or moderately advanced stages of adoption of solutions which can cover our full supply chain spectrum. And you would see a lot of organizations nowadays. They could have some part of their supply chain process automated and digitized where they have a clear data, but not the full supply chain. And that's where you will find the siloed data, the poor visibility, which is resultant from the siloed data, and also where you would see fluctuating stock management and safety stock demand replenishment. And I see that the aspect of the data and the broken it's not broken, but it's more of that siloed approach where some components are digitized and the others are not, is leading to that. But we are growing into, as a region, we are growing more into adopting the digital procurement and digital supply chain tools. There is a lot of now appreciation and understanding from organizations from top to bottom that it is a function that impacts, as you said, it impacts the bottom line and the profitability of organizations, and it has to be properly placed from that perspective, with enabling it with the necessary tools. And we are at an age that if you don't have the right technology, it's a bit challenging. It is challenging, actually. It's not leisure anymore. It's not a choice anymore. It's mandatory that organizations definitely have to embrace technology and embrace it in the right places.
Absolutely, Sarah. I agree with you 100%. Now, the overarching question for us is, how do you build a reliable supply chain? A reliable supply chain is also a competitive one, right? Where organizations can actually use the reliability of their supply chain to their competitive advantage. And one of the—
how do we create a resilient one? Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So reliable supply chain has not only can create a competitive one, but the supply chain has to be resilient. So you are 100% correct, Sarah. So now what we are going to look at is, how do you create a resilient supply chain? What are the key elements which goes into creating this resiliency in the supply chain, which can be used as a competitive advantage? I think one of the first key areas around creating an effective supply relationship or a reliant supply chain is to put together a supply relationship management program in place, which combines the three elements in terms of assessing the supply base, understanding who the suppliers are, information about their supply, information about the suppliers, more about a 360 view of all the organization, of 360 views, all the information you collect about the supply base. If you really think about many organizations, a lot of the organizations have data. It's not for the lack of data, but data is siloed. It's in many different ERP systems or other tools which they have in place. And the challenge is, at the end of the day, for a sourcing manager or commodity manager or procurement manager, they don't have this information in their fingertips, which will hamper them from making good business decision, resulting in resulting in good outcomes. The second area is, even which have all this information in place as part of your suppliers, especially the 360-degree view of your suppliers, which includes the metrics around suppliers, who they are, the financial metrics. In addition to continue to monitor your suppliers, you really have to make sure you collect information about their financial metrics, their sustainability metrics, and the overall risk metrics as part of their data collection process, which will help organizations to continue to monitor the risk and provide them with up-to-date information. Why do you actually have to monitor this and do a continuous and embark on a continuous management process? Because driving resiliency in your supply chain and building it's not a one-time effort. It's a continuous process. So you got to collect. You not only have to collect the information, but you got to get the right tools, bring the right set of external data, and combine with internal data to continue to do a continuous monitoring. And finally, at the end, you have to manage your suppliers and their suppliers so that you can address risk in the supply chain. So these are the three effective elements, and we're going to jump into these areas one by one in terms of how do you actually assess your supply base. Assessing supply base is not that difficult to do, but however, you really need to put together a list of digital tools which will help you to collect data in terms of all your suppliers, whether it's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, and ability for you to use digitized tool like the surveys and the campaign mechanism, is also combine that with third-party data so you can collect data. Number 2 is once you collect data, continue to assess the suppliers in terms of risk and performance. So once you're assessing your suppliers with the risk and performance so that you can drive quality and compliance, you are continuously and relentlessly able to obtain data to identify and mitigate risk, make sound decisions, as well as help you segment the suppliers. So you can also understand how the suppliers are segmented in terms of high, medium, low, or strategic or development, depending on whatever segmentation process you use. And why do we need to do it? Because you really need to do this information, because it's just like taking inventory of everything you have before you actually put together a monitoring process. Sarah, I know risk comes from different aspects of the supply chain, especially in your region and area where there are a lot of ports and hubs. What is your perspective on risk coming from the different nodes in supply chain?
Yes, I believe here in the Middle East and especially around mainly the GCC countries, there was a lot of strategic development and investment through the decades and the years in the past on developing this region as a hub and ports and logistics hub. So there is a lot of dependency on our businesses, from local businesses, and also from the businesses itself as hubs and ports. And they play a crucial part definitely in our supply chain. And that is where our first layer of risk comes from. You know, when we look at it, this is the first node of risk that comes for organizations in the region, is from the local ports and hubs themselves, because they are core to our operations. Then we could look at the supplier headquarters and sites. To us here in the Middle East is a little bit more into the geographical proximity, and we see that our supplier headquarters and sites, mainly the main suppliers, especially in manufacturing and in oil and gas, they might be in a little bit more further down around the globe in geographical regions. So the reach for us is challenging, and any challenges that they might have at their sites will directly impact us, because we're not close by and we cannot mitigate the risk of shortages in supply very quickly. Then comes the countries themselves, the geopolitical situations, the political atmosphere of the countries around us in the GCC. It also has impact, and it impacts our supply chain risk mitigation. And the supply paths, the manufacturing sites, might be at the end, it could come to our customer sites, because customers to us are local and customers mainly are within the region. So that is more into our control, but the external factors are not into our control. It's a very unique region because it sits within the routes that connects the world, and it's very rich in its ports and business and hubs business, but it's facing challenges because of that. And it's because also we don't have that close proximity to global suppliers where we can quickly mitigate risk, which will always prompt us to build these high safety stocks and high redundant stocks that we can depend on when when crises happen.
Thank you, Sarah. So risk comes, as Sarah mentioned, risk comes from all nodes of the supply chain. And one of the tools or the set of information you need is how do you assess this risk from the different nodes? So we'll look into the next aspect, which is how do you monitor all these different risks with up-to-date information? So what we have seen with our number of clients working in this area is you should have the ability, especially whichever tool set you're using, you should have the ability to connect to third-party applications to aggregate and enrich this data. Why do you need it? Because you don't have all the data within your organization. So take a look at, let's take an example of sustainability and CSR, right? So we have organizations like EcoVadis, which actually provides data sets which allows you to bring in that aspect of supplier information which is required for you to do risk assessment, especially in your supply chain, because end of the day, you don't want your brand to suffer if if they have really bad sustainability or they have CSR issues. Take the other example of other risk data sets which you can bring through third-party partners like Risk Methods, for example. So Risk Methods actually helps you to identify and assess all your different risks as you have seen with what Sarah has mentioned across the different nodes in your supply chain. Aggregate this information and have in one single place the ability for you to visualize the risk and then make decisions which will help you optimize your supply chain and continue to build a supply relationship program that will actually face the test of times as we are going through right now in the current phase of 2020.
I'd like to add here, Sundar, that just from my experience and my conversations also with professionals in the region, these providers and third-party risk data providers are not still known or recognized in the region, mainly because probably the factor that when we look at the supplier risk, we look at the internal impact. So we have supplier performance reviews, the supplier surveys, which are organization specific. So we assess the supplier from our own experience with that supplier and their performance. But I feel that it's now the time that we need to bring in and call and understand how is that supplier and their first-tier supplier and second-tier supplier from their end, how is their risk is being assessed, and what is the data that is available globally that can help me to understand their level of risk or not level of risk. But what I want to say is that third-party risk data providers are still not known and they're still not used. We're dependent more on local information about the legality and the financial health of the suppliers from our local data and our local systems and government databases. But we need to open up more to, as you said, to the risk methods and EcoVadis of the world and others, because that will give us more insight of how that supplier is, how we can mitigate the risk from the supplier, and also through the tiers of that supplier, backup suppliers and so on. So just I wanted to add that it's not much known and it's not much used. We're still in the ERP or the source to pay or the sourcing solutions, but not bringing in third-party data into our decision making.
Yeah, absolutely correct, Sarah. This is still in the infancy in some regions in the world. So the key takeaway here is you got to supplement and complement existing information, especially with your internal sources, and bring in external data sets like the ones from the partners we have mentioned here, so that you can enable additional capabilities and continue to assess and monitor risk in your supply chain. I think the last area which we're going to talk about is, that's great. We had a good assessment. We know all our data sources. We have gone through, organizations gone through us compiling all this information, and there's a continuous risk monitoring process. Then the question is, how do you manage risk with up-to-date information? What is the reason we have to do that, right? So let's look at pretty quickly. In order to manage your suppliers and the rest, number one, you got to onboard. You need to be able to onboard them into a system, engage suppliers with strategic development and program. That can include segmentation, scoring, innovation, assessment on the investment, so that you can manage all the data across from a global organization perspective. A lot of times what we see with organizations is they may have information in different ERP system. Let's say they even enrich that information with third-party data sources, but a lot of times the different market dynamics which happens in terms of suppliers being acquired, suppliers merging with other companies, that gets lost. And in the end of the day, you lack the visibility into their spend and also the risk profile. So in a nutshell, some of the key things an organization need to look at is ability for them to do 360-degree view of the supply information, engage suppliers from a strategic development perspective, have a segmentation strategy in place, and also manage all the data across the organization by using a single platform, which allows you to bring in not only internal data, especially from your vendor master management, but also external data. So you onboard, you engage your suppliers, you manage your data, which ultimately should be able to result in driving better category management practices, ability to identify issues upfront in the process rather than being reactive, and finally put together improvement plans so that you're more proactive than reactive and provide visibility across the tiers. Ultimately, you really wanted to build a supplier relationship management program that will supercharge your organization with the right set of metrics, with the right set of information, which will help you drive better visibility into the supply chain, better understanding of your supplier capabilities, as well as finally, ultimately helping you continue to drive revenue and profitability in your organizations. One of the key quotes I heard from one of our customers recently is, data by itself is not analytics, right? You can collect all data you want, but at some point in time, you have to understand the problems, the issues, the opportunity, and make sure that the data you drive is not about just pretty pictures, but eventually helps you with the outcome, which results in all the different attributes of better managing the categories better, managing the issues better, and also being more proactive than reactive and have visibility into not only a first-tier supply chain, but also the second-tier and third-tier suppliers, so that you can mitigate and build a resilient supply chain organization. Sarah, before I move to the demo, do you have any final comments?
Thank you, Sundar. Actually, you covered everything, and I believe we gave a fair brief idea on how just focusing on the supplier aspect in the organization from a supply chain perspective, what should organizations look at and start to put in place. I don't have a comment. I've seen that there are a couple of questions that we will need to answer at the end of the session. So maybe when we answer the questions, we will have also more comments. But I'd really like that we conduct the demo for the audience, because that will give them some understanding of what technology can do in the SRM areas. Thank you.
Absolutely. So let me quickly jump into a very quick demo in terms of showing how do you supercharge your SRM program with digital supplier risk and performance management solutions. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to share my other screen. All right. Can you see my screen?
From my end, yes, I can see, and I hope.
All right. Wonderful. So this demo is about day in the life story of a supplier manager who has got all the information he needs to assess the risk. So the first step, if you're looking at, is if you have an ideal environment where you can actually have information about your suppliers, and you can have different sets of external data coming from sources. How do you go about assessing and monitoring and managing risk? So the first thing is, as Ivalua, we have a digital cloud-based solution to address supplier risk and performance management. I, as a supplier manager, are logged into a supplier dashboard where I can, as a supplier manager, I have the ability to create new suppliers, monitor my risk center in terms of risky suppliers, browse the list of my global supplier repository, drive risk assessment, and also approve suppliers who are ready to do business with our organization, which are being requested from my stakeholders and my business partners. You can see in the dashboard, there are different sets of data sets, which are basically actionable dashboards. You can set suppliers the improvement plans, where you have a couple of suppliers where we have put together an improvement plan, a scorecarding in process. It's also, the dashboard is also very flexible in terms of adding different sets of data sets within the dashboard. Second thing you'll notice is this is a single, this platform is powerful with a single data model, which means we can do the entire source to pay process and continue to leverage data across all the different aspects of the source to pay business process. So first thing I'm going to show you is, as a supplier organization, let's actually quickly go and look at browsing my suppliers. So having all the suppliers in my fingertips, so I just had to click a button and say, I want to take a look at Kawasaki to see what kind of information I have available, so I can continue to engage them in my supplier, as part of my business in terms of strategic sourcing and operational procurement. So as a supplier manager, I have a 360-degree view of my supplier base. So if you look at it, I have information about the supplier, their spend, the type of supplier, the overall risk, the legal structure, and also it goes through the process. It tells me they have gone through the onboarding process, they are registered, and they are an active supplier. It also gives me in one single place the spend by commodity across the different regions, as well as the different years across the commodity. And on my right-hand side, there is also alerts coming in which simply says, hey, the supplier payment address had to be modified. The address is not correct. And also there is also another very key blocking alert which simply says low performance. So I really have to put a mitigation plan in place. So as part of the Supplier 360, again, Ivalua provides a complete solution which allows you to collect information about your suppliers, help them put them the different contacts within the set of suppliers in terms of who's actually managing it, as well as ability for you to add different set of documentations and certifications. It has a one single global repository for the supplier where you can look at different sets of legal documents. You can add many different certifications as part of the process. You can see some examples here. The ISO certifications, the CTPAT certification, the sustainability certifications you can add as part of the process, and also continue to manage the supplier in terms of getting this information ready and have reminders and checkpoints in place so the information is refreshed on a continuous basis. In addition to that, the supplier management solution, information management solution also provides the ability to qualify suppliers across many different dimensions. So in this example, I have actually qualified Kawasaki in terms of supplying to United States. For example, they're the preferred supplier for equipment. They are approved supplier for the manufacturing teams in different parts of the world. So it's very simple process where you actually have a qualification workflow, a set of qualification questionnaires, which will allow the supplier managers and the procurement commodity managers to continue to qualify suppliers in a much more seamless and simple manner. You can also see some of the questionnaires I have populated in terms of GDPR and export control declarations, which may be required as part of what we reviewed before to drive quality and compliance. You need to collect some of this information. So we have one single place where we can continue to drive assessment through questionnaires, collect information, and do the monitoring of the supplier information all in one single place. The key aspects which I wanted to talk about also, we talked about assessing the suppliers in terms of collecting data. Now, the second aspects we looked at is how do we bring in different sets of data as part of the overall supplier profile, basically combining external data with internal data. So Ivalua provides a risk center solution which allows you to bring in data from a number of external providers. So it starts off with the 4-quadrant analysis in terms of assessing risks across, in this particular example, you got financial, compliance, operational, security risk. You also have the overall risk designated. So when you designate a supplier with the risk, it actually transferred that into the different sets of the process. For example, if you're bringing in a supplier for a sourcing process or a procurement process and you want to select Kawasaki, the supplier, the sourcing manager, the procurement manager within their screen and the UI, they have the ability to quickly understand that Kawasaki is a low risk supplier and they can include them as part of their strategic sourcing aspect. Or if the supplier is a high risk for operational reasons, they can actually put together additional approval flow and other contingent actions to gather more information before they admit them in a sourcing process. The examples I have also talked about is ability for you to bring different sets of financial indicators. Some of these indicators in this particular case comes from Dun & Bradstreet or Beru Van Dyke. But if you have information coming from other third-party solutions, we have a very easy mechanism and an API available to incorporate that as part of the supplier profile. In addition to that, it also provides risk assessment questionnaires as part of the process, which allows you to assess the risk for the suppliers, all contained within the standard risk management offering we have. We talked about sustainability. Here is a sample profile from our partner EcoVadis, which actually allows you to bring in the EcoVadis sustainability information all within the context of the supplier profile. So as you continue to assess your suppliers in terms of performance and risk, you have the information readily available to do the assessment. And finally, we have a variety of partners to continue to bring other external source data like the risk methods data, as well as for example, you can check internal or external reliability of a supplier in terms of either it's a government database you want to check against, like the OFAC, or some other mechanisms you want to check against. We do have the ability to bring this data and display it all here. And finally, before I wrap up this demo, I want to quickly show you the ability for us to do a complete supplier assessment in terms of the information we collect as part of the process. So we can drive an assessment. In this particular case, I drove for Kawasaki. I assessed Kawasaki across delivery, quality, management, and cost as three or four KPIs for performance evaluation, and it creates a very nice scorecard as part of the main Supplier 360, and gives you the overall score in terms of the evaluation process we used and build the supplier scorecard for Kawasaki. And as a supplier manager or a commodity manager, I do have the ability to expose the scorecard to my supplier so that I can continue to provide visibility to them, so that they can put improvement process in place where either in some cases the cost is overrun or the quality is bad. You don't need to wait till then, but it can be proactive and drive these processes forward. Finally, I want to quickly show you the aspects around the risk management, which, as I mentioned before, we have a continuous monitoring risk center, which allows you to bring in different aspects of risk, because risk comes in different shapes and forms. As Sarah mentioned, you have different types of risk in the different nodes in your supply chain. For example, how do you assess your performance versus risks by supplier spend? So if you have a supplier categorization or a segmentation, how do you assess it? How do you assess, can you actually pivot your contracts for risk? And that's something we provide out of the box in terms of assessing contract risk. Finally, if you really think about my risk monitoring center and the risk dashboard, I have a number of suppliers under alert. So if I quickly look into Ansel, which is a supplier, its risk is very high. Let's look at why the risk is high. Because the risk is high because they have some delivery challenges, especially shipping products from the Far East. And this information in terms of risk assessment comes from our partner risk methods, and you can actually see some of the challenges in terms of risk groups, which clearly provides you a view into the risk in your supply chain at the tier 1 level, which is Ansel, and continue to drive deeper into your supply chain as part of the overall risk assessment process. I know I rushed through the demo just for the sake of making sure I'm on time, because we need some time to do the Q&A. At this point in time, what we're going to do is we're going to quickly switch back to our presentation. But in a nutshell, what I have demonstrated here is very clearly the ability for us to do supplier information, ability for us to collect and assess supplier information as part of the overall supplier 360, ability for organizations to continuously monitor the set of data, both external data and internal data, as part of risk assessment. And the third thing we have done is ability to run risk profiles and risk assessments, as well as performance management as part of the overall scorecarding process. So you actually have a more proactive approach to managing suppliers. So with that, I am actually going to turn it back to Sarah and the CIPS team to go through the Q&A portions. Let me quickly share my screen. And
thank you very much, Sundar. It was, as you said, it was rushed, but it was a compressed amount of information on digital capabilities, on supplier risk management and supplier performance management as well. And I believe we can also answer a lot of questions at the back of this demo. Thank you very much for it, much appreciated. We have another 20 minutes, so or maybe 16 minutes. We want to dedicate them for the Q&A. So over to you, Sam Achompong, so that you can direct us through the Q&A session.
Sarah, Sundar, thank you very much for riveting session. Thanks for the information. I think you covered a lot of ground, which probably answers some of the questions that are out there. But we do have a lot of questions. I'll go through them. So first of all, directed at you, are there any tools that you have within your system that can be used to reduce supply chain risk, and how instrumental and effective have these tools been to reduce supply chain risk, especially prior and during the COVID-19 situation?
Absolutely. I'll start off with my answer. I'm pretty sure Sarah has also comments to share. So we do have, we just talked about a digital supplier risk platform we just showed you. With the digital supplier risk and performance management platform, we do have the ability to monitor risks as well as bring in external data sets. Now, the question around before and after COVID, right? COVID actually, if you think about COVID, right? COVID caused challenges in especially for, it affected many industries from a variety of different areas. One is around ability, because it is a pandemic, it caused sickness, which means workers who are working in plants are being prevented from going to their plants. So if, for example, if you actually have a supply risk and performance management solution, which some of our customers do, keep in mind you can put together contingency plans in place. So before COVID, you may not have to exercise this contingency. For example, let's say you're buying a PPE equipment and you have supplier ABC coming from 2 suppliers in one part of the world where the supply, you don't have enough supply, and you can't really, it's more about the supply, you can't really get the product transported out of that region. If you put the contingency in place, if you identified other suppliers that can supply this particular product who are nearby to your region, now you actually have will be able to manage that situation so that you're not shutting down deliveries. So yes, before, whether it is COVID, whether it is tsunami, whether it is strikes at the port or some other political unrest, that's a lot of this cannot be predicted. Having a supplier risk and performance management program with the contingency plans in place will go a long way in addressing some of these market changing events.
Great answer, Sundar. I'll move on to the next question. How can your tool be used in terms of ongoing supply relationship management? So as an example, does it allow the sharing of categories to sanctions for liquidated damages, etc., against the supplier, and actively manage the supplier through the process?
Yeah, very
So,
good question.
SRM.
No problem, Sam. Very good question. So if you think about, let's take OFAC checks as an example. OFAC checks is basically checking a supplier against a federal or a government database, whether this is the right supplier, they have no challenges, right? So it is basically pulling information from a third-party source. So we have clients who basically routinely do OFAC checks for every supplier. So a lot of times your OFAC checks are done by suppliers. It's also done for individuals too. So if you're dealing with the small consulting companies or small regions, you have to check. You can check against OFAC. But the best practice or the strong practices we have seen with our clients is having the OFAC check as part of the standard supplier onboarding program. So you have a new supplier coming in. One of the health checks you have to do is go and check the OFAC, go and check against OFAC to make sure that that supplier can do business with you in the country you're operating.
Okay. That's a great answer to that, and our answers from both perspectives, from the IT perspective and the compliance. So thanks for that, Sundar. Another question: what industries are you currently serving, and do you have supply databases for particular industries?
Yeah, absolutely. Ivalua serves a variety of industries, and of the last couple of years, we have a really main focus in manufacturing, which includes a lot of different subverticals, public sector, healthcare, engineering, construction, financial services. While we have customers in pretty much every industry within our customer base, we have customers from pretty much every industry. Especially, we have a lot of large customers in manufacturing and engineering and construction, because even if you look at manufacturing, there are different sets of projects we do for our clients. A lot of our manufacturing companies embark on engineering constructions or CapEx or direct materials. At the same time, we also address CPG, retail, as well as food manufacturing companies. So our experiences across all these different companies, we have information for suppliers as well as best practices, which goes across these multiple verticals. But we also have a focused approach in some of these verticals as we continue to address supply, I would say, client challenges in many of these verticals.
Great. So you have a wide variety of categories that are effective with your tool, as well as databases, is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Great. Can your tool be effectively used for managing, categorizing, and recording all shipping and logistics risks?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, shipping and receiving lists can be recorded. The risk information can be incorporated as part of the overall supply relationship management program. Typically, if you have shipments going through your logistics application using your logistic carriers, that information can be brought into Ivalua and can be used as one of the KPI measures for evaluating supplier risk and performance management.
Okay. And an interesting question here on a general procurement topic. So some people are saying that due to market uncertainty, there's probably a business case to make use of and to engage with new suppliers with better rates. Other people are recommending to stick to your current suppliers for the same reason, i.e. the uncertainty. What do you recommend?
Well, it is very situational, category dependent. Yes, if you already have a great relationship with the supplier and you build the trust over long term, it is ideal to continue the relationship. But let's say you have a supplier who is a great supplier, but they have major challenges in their supply chain. They can produce the parts, and they can deliver the parts on time to your own facility. or they can produce, or they can serve you in the time frame you need. In those cases, you have to look for alternate sources, simply because end of the day, you are responsible, you have fiduciary responsibility to your organization from a revenue and profitability. You're not actually switching suppliers for the sake of short-term gains. You're looking at suppliers and alternate suppliers because collectively you got to help everybody to go through this pandemic, especially what we are facing today. So yes, you should look at your suppliers as partners. At the same time, you need to also help them to get over the challenges. But ultimately, you're responsible for your supply chain organization, and you need to put contingency efforts to bring in new source of supply.
Great. Okay, so let's go over in the region, specifically KSA and the onboarding rather third-party data. Do you have any case studies for the onboarding of third-party data? Have you done this? Have you been successful in the region, specifically in KSA?
Sarah, can I defer this question to you? I definitely have some answers, but I can defer to you.
Thank you very much, Sundar. Thank you for the question. Actually, to date, because we're just starting with the region in the Middle East, we still haven't started on bringing in third-party data into our clients' applications. But we have conversations, and I can see that there's a growing footprint for companies like, for example, Bureau Van Dijk, which they are building local supplier data into their global systems, because we also need to consider the fact that the global providers of third-party data sources, they have to start also to build the local database of our local companies. It's not sufficient that they bring in also, only the global content, but there has to be the local content. So even these providers are now starting to build the local content. I can't, from the top of my head, recall any of our clients or other organizations that I interact with that have used third-party sources. It's mainly, as I said, a lot of the third-party sources comes from government systems, either be it licensing systems or credit bureaus or so on and so forth, which are local, but not from the global ones. And the global ones are now starting to build more database.
Yeah, if I may add, it's not for the lack of data. It's actually a lot of companies in the Middle East, they have sources internally. There's a lot of new companies coming on. And Ivalua's partners, which we talked about, actually have very programs in place in the region to continue to bring in data related to companies in the region. So even if there are organizations, even though we are talking to organizations, a lot of times what happens is we will engage with the client. We'll work with them on some of the metrics they really want to collect to bring in third-party data. We will introduce our partners, and the partners will work with them directly, and that actually becomes a standard as part of our ongoing projects. Thank you, Sarah.
Right. Well articulated. Let's go into a couple of questions about suppliers' credibility. So how do you get into a supplier's supply chain status and their standing as far as their corporate capabilities and also their supply chain status all the way down the supply chain? And how dynamic are your tools, especially in terms of quickly assessing emerging supply chain risks?
Yeah, so this is the million-dollar question, right? Because supply chain risk is not a one-time, assessing supply chain risk is not a one-time effort. It is a continuous process. So let's address the dynamic nature, right? Supply chains are dynamic. That's the reason it's called a supply chain. So in terms of our tools, we have the ability to continuously bring in data from third-party systems, to use internal data to assess supplier risk as well as supply chain risk in a periodic, in a continuous fashion, based on categories, based on risk factors across a variety of domains. So the question is, always it's the tool, it can do a lot of the things what is being requested, but it's also depend on people and the process, because a lot of times the tools can do, because it's technology, and technology, we have technology which allows you to do it, but a lot of times what we find is it's the people and the process, sometimes it becomes the barrier. So as long as we have that infrastructure covered, Ivalua's tools in terms of driving supply chain, providing visibility to supply chain risks, as well as building a resilient supply chain is continues to work, and we have done it. We've not done in different parts of the world, and we are going to get started as we continue to work in Middle East.
Great, and final question, Sundar and Sarah. Pre-COVID, when we're talking about technology, there was a lot of talk about Industry 4.0, the fourth industrial revolution. We're moving into that technological space. There's different solutions. Having come into the COVID-19 era, something that was unexpected, how important is IT really proving to be in mitigating the issues caused by COVID-19?
COVID-19 is a life-changing event for pretty much everybody on this earth. Every company, every individual, it has affected all parts of life. In an organization, this is one of the key tenets of building a reliable supply chain, right? Internal collaboration, whether it's IT, whether it's supply chain, whether it is procurement, all have to work collaboratively. It's all the more important. COVID-19 has actually brought into effect some of the, in market leading organization, in progressive organizations, they were able to face some of these challenges because they're already very collaborative, and IT and business, whether and procurement, are all in the same, or all on the same table discussing challenges collectively to address it. COVID-19 has actually done a major challenges for organizations where some of the internal stakeholders, whether it's IT or supply chain, they're not collaborating or talking to each other. But the overarching message is, whether you're in IT, whether you're in supply chain or procurement, it is time for these organizations to collaboratively work together to continue to drive their company moving forward. Some cases, IT can take the charge in driving change and digitization. In some cases, it's actually the procurement and supply chain which is taking the charge. But the end result is that the functions within the organizations have to be in sync, have to have visibility into information about their suppliers and their data sets, and continue to work together to put a program in place that can face the test of times.
Great answer, Sundar. And I think what you're saying is essentially is how you do things that makes a difference, and IT is a very useful and able enabler. So great question to end the session. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. It's been a great session, and I think we've learned an awful lot. We've had a great set of questions. Thank you to everyone who participated. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get to all the questions, but we certainly will, if you keep in contact with us, we certainly will keep the conversation going. So thank you to Ivalua. Thank you all for attending. We'll see you again at the next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.